Hello, my name is Philip Bither. I'm the Curator for Performing Arts here at the Walker Arts Center. And with me is Annie B. Parson from Big Dance Theater, one of the co-directors and creators of a brand new work called Supernatural Wife that the Walker is happy to be a co-commissioner of, and we open in a couple of days here in Minneapolis. So Annie, I want to start by the same question that everyone is asking you, but what drew you to Euripides Alcestis as a piece, knowing that this is, as you said to me a while back, a problem play, isn't often done, and is a piece that other theater directors have shied away from because of its characteristics?
I can only guess why people haven't really worked with this material before or very often. And I think it's probably exactly what drew me to it, which is sort of twofold. One is that it's truly ambiguous. And I think many audience people and directors are a little afraid around ambiguity because they don't know how to feel. And I think that's Euripides' point. And so because he's putting you in that position directorially, it's really could be potentially a problem to try to figure out how to deal with this really insistent sense of ambiguity in the piece, in the writing. And I think also, I mean, there are so many things that drew me to it. Maybe one of the main things is that it flies between these different tones, and I could feel musically, you know, when I was reading it, I could feel musically so many different ideas coming in my mind. And when I can hear something when I'm reading it musically, then I know that I can work with it, I can make dances to it, I can stage it in a way that makes sense to me, like Euripides doesn't rest in any single tone, which is extremely rare in a playwright, I think. We could sort of name any playwright and feel like once you get into the body of the play, you sort of know the tone of the play. This is the second Euripides play that we had worked with, so I can only speak with any sort of authority at all on two of his plays, and both of them do that, where in the beginning, or in one sense, it's a comedy. And I was positive I was reading a comedy. And I was laughing, and I was like, starting to feel this great sense of irony. I think maybe he's probably one of the earliest ironists there are, not in the sense of like David Letterman irony, but
right.
In like Flaubert,
Sure.
Really
which is a sort of different type of irony than we often think of.
And it's really hard to talk about. I think maybe you could talk about it better than me, but theatrical irony in the sense that the audience feels differently than the character feels. And that he's setting one emotion up against another. He does it within the writing, and he does it within the characters. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I was talking about the tones. Certainly a comedy, certainly ironic, certainly tragic in parts, deeply tragic, where the writer asks you to grieve for this man who is suffering so greatly from his sort of self-delusion, mistakes, consequences, and for the most part, for his bereavement. And then, again, the tone changes into something where he sort of takes that away from you, and it becomes like a fairy tale or something. It certainly isn't a fairy tale throughout it. There's parts that are so real, so emotionally real, that you almost wonder if he experienced something like this in his life, or if he's just trying to understand what grief really is, what we call the stages of grief or something. And he does it, much more deeply, but he's really looking at these parts of what it is to grieve. So I loved that because a lot of our work has these huge tonal shifts, and I also felt like I could understand it, and I wasn't going to I like the challenge of not letting the dog walk me, kind of thing.
The dog being the audience?
The dog being the play.
The play, yeah. Right. Because it's interesting about the relationship with audience, too, in that your comment about directors being sort of fearful of the ambiguity in some ways could be a commentary on the state of theater and its sort of reluctance to deal in more complex range of emotions that shift dramatically. And I wondered if, as you have made the work and now seen it with audiences, it premiered in Paris and then has played once in the States at Jacob's Pillow, if you feel the audience, a contemporary audience being able to shift tonally with you through the piece.
I don't know. I think maybe we'll learn more here.
Yeah.
Because in France, everywhere we went, of course, we had super titles. So there was a lot of focus on the words.
Right.
Because the
Sure.
words are these huge things that are
Right.
just like running
sure.
across the top
Right.
of the piece. And because, so much to say. They're all such important things to think about. But so it's a little hard for me to know in a
Right.
foreign audience. Then Jacob's Pillow, that's a very specific kind of audience. It's a vacationer's audience.
Right.
And so I feel like the Walker's going to be our first audience that I understand, that I might
Sure.
be in that audience.
Yeah,
I might
sure.
go to that theater, you know what I
Right.
mean? Not that I wouldn't go to Jacob's Pillow, but primarily it feels like that audience is more from people out of town. I don't know. I wasn't sure when I was there. I think that I'd like to know how the audience feels at the end. I'm changing the ending a little bit today. Of course, not the text. The text is brilliant at the end, and I want to just make sure that everybody hears it better. Because
right.
the last couple of lines are like a little enigma.
Yep.
And so I'm concerned that I've dealt my cards too heavy on the visual, and you're not really hearing the words. And the dryness of the language is so ironic at the end, or not, I don't know, but it's just and so I'm gonna work on that a little bit in the next 2 days. But I did think a little bit about I was visiting young Jean Lee's rehearsal or showing.
Yeah.
And I know she asks people a lot of questions, and I thought, she really wants the audience to think.
Right.
She really wants me to think, oh, wow, I'm really thinking right now. And then I thought, yeah, and a lot of directors, they really want the audience to feel. And I thought, well, I really want the audience to see. And sometimes I feel like, particularly in a piece like this, where we're really dealing with a real monster of a play, that I would go to, my whole sort of, the style is so deeply rooted in seeing for the audience. Like I'm asking them, see this, think about it through seeing, see. So just in the ending, I maybe want to lift that a little bit and just hear it, hear those words.
It seems your work, though, hits marks very often where your seeing is so critical and the visuals are so beautiful, but thinking and feeling are also woven throughout. Was that part of a conscious effort with this work, or
no? But because maybe that's Paul's job a little bit. I don't really know. I'm not really good at reading a play, and I mean So what drew me to the play, because I chose this play, was something that maybe people think is weird, which is that I read the play and I didn't understand it at all. Like I had no idea what happened. I just was like, why did she do that?
And did you read Anne Carson's translation first? Yeah.
But I just felt like why, I didn't understand her motivation to sacrifice herself for her husband. And I was really hooked on that question. I just couldn't let it go, as a feminist and as a contemporary reader and as a woman in contemporary society. It just dogged me through the whole thing. And why is he acting like that? And why is he blaming her for doing something for him? And, so in some sense, I didn't understand the play at all, because it's really not what the play's about at all. So, and I knew I didn't understand it. And so that really drew me to the play also, because I know that there's very little I know from making a lot of pieces, but the one thing I do know is that some material is rich enough to hold you for the year or 2 years that you live with it, and some is too thin. And one of the most irritating things is to work on material that's too thin.
Right.
And it's
as a creator, given
as a creator.
that you do spend as a company
Yeah.
a good solid
Huge amount of
year
your
or
life.
longer
Yeah.
on just one piece to make a
Yeah.
piece. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it has to feed you every minute, and you can feel when the work is thin very
Right.
shortly. Same with music, and in this case, I knew right away, partially because I didn't understand it, and partially because I could hear musically where certain sections were, that this was going to be interesting for me.
And there must have been enough in that first reading that gave you confidence that beyond just obviously it's Euripides, but that said, I don't understand this, but it's complex enough. It's a big enough puzzle that I really want to go after it and figure it out.
Yeah, and the subject matter, really attracted me.
There are multiple readings of this play over time. There is a feminist sort of reading of it in the sense of a critique kind of on male dominance in that time. That seems like it's not a necessarily the theme that most emerges that you guys in any way. I mean, it seems like that's a kind of misread somewhat. Would you say?
Well, I asked, as I said, I was fixated on that at first,
Right.
and I asked Anne Carson about that, and she said the play starts after the decision is made. That is not the subject matter of this play.
Right.
That really liberated me. And then yesterday in the New York Times Magazine, there's an article about Herzog. They interview him about his new film.
Right.
About the death penalty. And he says
Yeah.
literally the same thing about the movie he's making. The interviewer says, why did you select someone to portray who was clearly guilty? Why didn't you choose someone that there was some sort of question?
Right.
He said that's not what the movie's about. It's about what it's like to live those last few days. So it really relates, once I realized that the subject matter of the play is not that feminist or or misogynist or whatever moment. It's really about what happens after that decision. Then that sort of all went away.
Right.
You know. But there are so many readings of this play. There's a whole book that has it's almost like prismatic if you look at it.
All the different kinds of productions that have,
all the different interpretations
Right.
from the early 19th century on of how academics viewed the character of Alcestis, martyr, hero, savior, abused wife. I mean,
Right.
you name it.
Right.
Because as Anne says, she's the blankest woman in the world, which is not how we portrayed her at all.
Because I wondered, how did you portray her, and what was the solution you went after around the characterization of Alcestis?
Well, funny enough, because there's sort of two of us plus the whole group working on the piece, Paul had the strongest. It's like sort of like grabbing at the material that you feel strongly about. He grabbed at the character of Alcestis, and I grabbed at the character of Admetos. So Admetos is really in my hands, the king, and the woman is really in Paul's hands in a sense. And he came up with a solution that I love and didn't understand at all when he started working on it, which is that he used My Girl Friday, the Rosalind Russell movie,
right.
and he had Timberly work with the rhythms of Rosalind Russell's speech. So like she would have an in-ear thing where she would be listening to Rosalind Russell but saying the Alcestis text.
Oh, really?
And it makes her really fast talking and decisive. Because Paul was really interested in not, what he was really interested in was the fact that she had to negotiate her death. So it's like, yes, I'm going to do this for you, but I'm only going to do it if
under these conditions,
and I have like 5 minutes to get those across to you, and they're really, otherwise I'm not doing it. So he felt it was one of those fast-talking early, post-war movie stars that were just. And so I thought, that really made the character come to life for me, and that was his approach. And for Admetos, I was really interested in the emotionality of that character. So I went this totally other route, was into Yiddish, early Yiddish theater.
I wondered about that connection.
And
what did early Yiddish theater and silent films bring to the characterization of the king that you found relevant?
Well, it just felt right that, and maybe for us it's right.
You as a company.
Because in a sense, like, because I'm a choreographer and my approach is and also of my own time, emotion isn't a card that I've really played very often or been very involved in as an audience member. So emotion would be like one of many elements that one would play with, like time, space, motion, shape, dynamic, story, line, emotion.
Yeah, right.
So it's equal to and no more important, in fact, like probably the poor cousin of all those other things. And so
Is that due in part because, I mean, in the contemporary and experimental theater realm, there's a fairly high suspicion around emotion in that its relationship to manipulation of audience around sometimes false emotion.
Yeah, and I feel, yeah, absolutely, and mine too. And being a student of the generation that followed the No Manifesto of Yvonne Rainer, even though she let it go the minute that she wrote it, and she hates it when anybody brings it up. She's like, but we took that seriously. It was in the water. It was like part of what we saw. Even if you'd never read it, everything that I saw when I was a young choreographer was absolutely devoid of emotion.
Right.
And so I just thought, let's try and see what this stuff is like.
With this piece.
With this piece.
Because you've been quoted as saying that, of kind of looking at emotion in a different way in some ways for the first time.
Yeah, I feel that way.
And how's it gone? I mean,
well, it's very emotional. I mean, at times, like we did a run through last week.
For the creators as well as?
I don't know for the audience, but for me watching it, there are times where I find myself getting really emotional because he really is grieving. And it's the Yiddish theater thing was that I'm not into sort of naturalistic theater yet.
Right.
Maybe someday, but. And I see some companies in my midst are going towards that. I've seen like Sun Also, there's things where I'm starting to see it coming
People
around.
People from the downtown theater world starting to look at it now.
Definitely. And it's true with us too that there are many things that come into our work that they come in the back door, so they feel a little bit different than if you're just saying, oh, I just accept this as a given. We're just going to be emotional. Well, no, not necessarily. So the Solomon Mikoils, who is this great Yiddish theater performer, seemed like a perfect vehicle for the king because he's very emotional, but he's also very, very stylized.
Right.
There's nothing naturalistic, and it's the emotion is heightened enough for Greek theater. You cannot be reductive with this stuff. No matter how much you're playing with the styles and contemporizing it or taking it into some other realm structurally, you can't be reductive. It'll kill you. We've all seen cute Greek stuff. It's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
So you have to find something that has some reference, or at least for me, I had to find references musically and so forth, and in terms of the king, that were deep enough in themselves. And there was this tiny clip of Solomon Mikoils playing King Lear in the death of his daughter, death of Cordelia, 2-minute clip that is so extraordinary.
And that clip was all that was
That's all that was left.
Survived from that film.
And so we just physically memorized it. And so the king who plays the king, is going through the score of that moment of the death of his daughter. But it's not just that. It's not just the physical, because a lot of people use physical vehicles to get to emotion, like Michael Chekhov technique. There's many ways. It's also almost a dance perspective on emotion that's different than going through the acting, because I work in straight theater as a choreographer, and I see people sit at tables for 3 weeks and talk about plays and try to find the emotion. You look surprised. It surprises me too. Right. It's an amazing, weird
But it's interesting. I think a general theater audience doesn't necessarily think of that as odd, and I wondered, as a choreographer, who uses the body, what the body, and this is speaking maybe not so much to me, but to others who may see this, what does the body bring to theater that language and visual and other components simply doesn't? How do you use movement and the physical form in that way to get at, say, this emotion in this way?
Well, I don't really know, because I'm just sort of starting on that. I had ways to do it in this but like all the pieces I'm making, I'm just trying stuff.
Huh, right.
So I'm not really sure. I know how to use the body to do other things, but nobody would want to know how arbitrary it is. The movement material it is I'm either really good at sculpting stuff, or I'm really like a great believer that movement is extremely flexible. But almost any movement, not all, but most movement can be sculpted into something that has the meaning that you need it to mean. I don't really know why, but so the sources for my movement are extremely arbitrary, like MapQuest.
Right.
Like stuff that, you know what I mean? Like,
just you need a starting point.
I need a starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the starting point needs to tickle me in some way,
Yeah.
and the group. But I mean, I could take, a lot of this material was taken from an exercise in a Malcolm Gladwell book, judge an exercise that was like an IQ test. I mean, like it could be anything,
Right,
really,
sure.
but I have to know what to do with it. If I don't understand what to do with it to make it into movement material, then it's useless to me.
Right.
So in terms of finding the emotional life through movement, well, I tried to do it through this Yiddish theater character this time.
Right.
And I think, like, I like the results of it, and I also, of course, do it through music, which is
Sure.
age-old.
Yeah. Well, and it's something I wanted to, I know we're hitting lots of points, but I ask you about as well, because you're such a musical creator, you and Paul both, but you really create a sound, like a sonic score for your works. And I wondered how you go about that, or what, is that just drawn from your upbringing and your love of music, and then, but you almost are like a mashup DJ that is sort of pulling from lots of different sources and shaping music to sort of create an architecture for your work in some ways. And what's that process like? And where do you draw your sources from for our work?
I mean, you're asking the right person, because that's completely my domain.
Yeah.
So I'm probably like you, like a total maven when it comes to music. Listening and like I'm like a hound, like a gatherer of music. So before YouTube and iTunes and all that, I would be sitting at the New York Public Library listening to the records, and you're just grabbing records off the shelf and listening, because getting music to you was different then than it is now.
Right.
And
was it a conscious interest in having sounds and a sonic tapestry that is unique for audience, that people may not have heard, or that has a particular texture that...
I don't know. I'm not sure. More like it's just something I love.
Because the eclecticism of what you draw from is so significant. You really seem to listen to a lot of different styles and eras.
I do. I guess, like... and that takes me back to the Euripides. I think he's like, I mean, there's something like that magpie-like in his, like his ease and ability to just be one way, in one section, and then just not be that way anymore in the next section. He just sort of has this freedom of just like, this is like a rock opera, and this section feels really like emo, and this section really feels, like early minimalists, and this,
So was it fun and somewhat easier on this play to select the music because the tonal shifts were so clear to you in the right reading of it?
Yeah. It was part of the reason why I thought I could do it.
Right.
I think that when I'm listening to music, I don't know what it is, but I just have really strong feelings about it, and they're different than anybody. They're different because I can see when I'm really into a piece of music, and it's not like anybody else is necessarily into it. You know what I mean? Like I have this feeling like I'm hearing something different than other people, and it may not be, people may not agree with me.
Right.
But it's something that it's really strong with me. I have it with costumes too, but I don't have it with lighting, and I don't have it with some other elements. That's just something that I feel like is part of when I make something, before the movement, before everything. I'm listening to music. And if I feel like I hear a piece of music, like I heard David Lang's Men before I made the piece. And then, but I had been reading the Alcestis, and it reminded me of the sort of airlessness of parts of the play. and it had the right sense of gravitas to me. And I thought this piece of music is going to really support certain parts of this play. Sort of more like that, or like I heard this Flaming Lips, just a little tiny piece of Flaming Lips, like an intro thing. And it just felt really the right sort. It's a passionate, deep color, like reds and pinks, and I'm a little bit like, what's that word where you can see colors? Hear colors?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
And I thought, this is a way that I could express how this sort of love thing that this man had for this woman, I'm not sure she had it for him, but that the king might have had for the queen, that I can relate to on some level. But it's also kind of ironic. At the same time, it's not straight ahead beautiful in any way. But I always want to break out of it. Like, I don't like that it's so magpie or collage-y. And it's really Jane Shaw, our sound designer, that makes it into a whole. I just hand her a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm like, I think this, like the opening piece in this play is extremely aggressive. She's not going to ask me, why are you choosing this really aggressive piece of sort of metal?
Right.
She doesn't, that's not our relationship, but she'll find a way to make it work. And then I like to use it like I use dance material. Well, I'll take little sections of it and use it as a motif in other places in the play. But I don't always want to work like that.
Right.
Yeah.
It does seem also, although you articulated it very well around how the tones and textures of a certain kind of music and your personal response to it fit within a section of the play, it seems like you also trust your gut quite a bit around both the movement and the musical choices.
All I have is my gut. I really don't have an academic, scholarly mind. I certainly don't have the education.
Although you teach at NYU.
I do, but I teach choreography.
Right.
It's almost like a very rarefied, world where I understand on some level the way movement is crafted, but I couldn't do this play without Paul. I don't know how to deal with like a really serious piece of text on my own.
I was wondering about that, if you could talk for a little bit. There's very few duos, especially spouses, partners in life who work as a creative team, and how you guys split up responsibilities, or what the challenges that sometimes come with that, or what the benefits are in some ways.
I think the benefits are that you always have your work with you, so it's not like you have to plan meetings or anything.
Is that the drawback as well?
It's the drawback as well. We always work together. We met working, so it's sort of just, we don't even think about it. But
although you do some
we
other
both
projects.
work separately.
Yeah. Is that important?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Our work is really different when it's separate. If you went and looked at a piece that Paul just directed a piece for this group of magicians.
Oh yeah, I heard about it down in Philadelphia. Right.
He's just a completely different. When we're together, it's just a completely different piece. But
is there a lot of struggle over compromise?
No. No.
You're able to reach
alpha.
a common ground.
No, well, I don't know about that. But, there's certain things you can't really tease out, like who does what. But you could say there's certain things that Paul definitely dominates in, which is the performers want to talk to Paul about the text. They do not want to talk to me about the text.
Right.
I'm going to have the same kind of response that sort of they would have.
Right.
Paul is absolutely brilliant talking about text. So his whole relation, he'll sit with a play for months before he even directs it, just thinking about it, studying it, reading about it.
Is that how he's always
That's how he's always
directing?
worked, and just having a whole imaginative journey where he's figuring out what he wants to do with it. Whereas I don't read the play. I read it once, and then I read it in rehearsal.
Sure.
So, I'm not proud of that. It's just, it doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
So I need to understand it. I need to know it as much as I can when I start. But it's totally intuitive for me. I'm not proud of that at all. It's just sort of the way it works.
Sure.
So, and it sounds very sort of male-female also, unfortunately.
Is that why your work, one of the things I've always admired about big dance theater is that, there's quite a few, there's a whole history of dance theater companies or choreographers who work in the realm of dance theater, but really your work feels not like that dance theater. It's more like theater dance in a certain way. It's got its own form in some ways, where the elements are more equally balanced in some ways. And is that due to the fact that you both work together in that way? And bring different
definitely.
elements?
Before I worked with Paul, as creators, my work was dance, and it had text in it, but it was totally non-narrative. And I just made a small piece for a French group, and that piece is all dance. I mean, there's no text in it, but it's very theatrical. I mean, my work's always been theatrical, but it's not. Nobody's talking.
Yeah.
You know.
When you mention non-narrative, I have to ask you. It's a sort of slightly side question, but given that in some of the original work that you and Paul create together for Big Dance Theater is the contents you create all yourselves. It's an original play that you will make. With a work like this that has a narrative structure so clearly outlined, did you have to work differently? And I know you've taken on other literary texts, or the other Euripides play you did. Does that feel quite different, that you're having to create within a more narrative structure?
It's really fun because it's extremely supportive when you have a playwright that good.
Right.
You know, in a way, it almost feels like cheating because you're not making your own piece. You're adapting something that already is so brilliant. I mean, you can really screw it up, but narrative or non-narrative, even if you were like riffing on a Bruegel painting, I don't know.
Yeah,
you know, there's that beautiful structure that exists. So we almost do it as a break, in a sense, because it's so hard to make
like a palette
original
cleanser
work.
in a certain way.
Or we did in this case. I mean, there was another reason we wanted to do Anne Carson's translation of A Greek Again, which was that when we first did it, it was a job, and we were hired to do it. It wasn't our company.
Sure.
And so we only had 3 weeks to make it.
The last
one,
Greek,
that was Orestes, and we did it really fast.
Right.
It was great. It went really well. But the people in our group were like, I want to do Anne Carson. You know, so that's why we did.
Oh,
yeah,
I see.
they felt a little gypped because they were on tour. They couldn't be in that piece.
Right. Yeah.
So, and we got so much from it artistically that we wanted to do it again. But yeah, I mean, when you work from a script, it's almost like you're in a different room.
Right.
You know, because you're asking different things of the performers. We're creating mounds of material. It's not like we're not generating. We're very generative no matter what. It's not like in a regular play, which, as I said, I'm very familiar with because I work in straight theater too. It's not like that process. But it's different than when you have nothing. You have nothing.
Right.
You say, okay, we're going to make a piece. And then the choreographer says, gives a few ideas or says, this piece, maybe in this piece I'm going to explore something about my whatever. You know, it's totally authorial. You don't feel that way when you have a script. You feel a little, it's daunting in a different way because the writer is so tremendous. You don't want to look thin next to his work, but
you did have the liberty, and you mentioned this when we were talking earlier around dispensing with parts of the translation. You could really, Anne Carson gave you the right to pick and choose.
She did. She gave us full freedom to cut as much as we want, and we cut, I think, 4,000 words.
Out of a total of how many?
10,000.
40% of...
No, actually, I think we cut 6,000 and kept 4,000. I think that's what the relationship was. I should check. But, and we didn't know we might cut all the words. We really didn't know how it was going to go. But I really love writing. I love language. I love reading. And I tried to make the piece feel like you were reading it. So we project a lot of text. We do stuff with text as object also.
Right.
But we had full freedom. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it.
I have a question that you might be answering on Paul's behalf, but Paul was quoted in saying, when the question was raised around one of the challenges contemporary audiences have with Greek drama is that the gods are so all-powerful and can kind of, drive the state of what the humans go through. And Paul said something to the effect of that the gods are actually jealous of humans because they only have one life to live, and therefore the stakes are raised. They're not immortal, and every act that they make is that much more dramatic and important. And it almost turns the gods into kind of comedic characters in a certain way. Did you feel that in the making of this work, that in some ways the gods, someone else was quoted as saying that Euripides' brilliance was that he really wrote about people as people, and in some ways the gods were just kind of a vehicle to get to human questions around how to live a life and things. Is that what you felt? Or?
Yeah, it's such a Paul thought. I can't totally get inside his head on that one, but I could say that in this play there is a character of a demigod, and that's Heracles,
right,
a.k.a. Hercules. And he's tricked in the middle of the play. He's tricked, but then he gets back at the mortals. And I think maybe in terms of what Paul's saying, it's a really interesting dilemma. We'd love to have Paul here right now, but because in the end you say, did the demigod have the power that he's proposing that he had? And that's where some of the ambiguity lies. So maybe Euripides is thinking a little bit about mortal power, but he feels so contemporary because you don't feel that he has that much stake in the gods. Like he actually tricks the god, in the play. So. And
Heracles is, in some ways, certain interpretations in this play make him to be a sort of brutish kind of idiot, and others, he sort of emerges as something of a hero. Where do you think your interpretation landed with him?
He's complicated. I mean, that's why it's such a cool play. I mean, he is a heavy partier type.
Right.
He's thuggish. He's very thuggish with his labors. In ours, of course, he's a drummer because the actor's a drummer, and we're always, drawing from people's lives when they're playing a part because they're not being those people. Like we're not, I mean, that's what really separates our work from regular theater.
Yeah, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no sense that the performers are being those people. They're just acting out the part in a sense. They're putting on the clothes and saying the words. But in a sense, that's why a lot of my work starts with a big dance, is because I want the audience to see this is a dance company, this is a band that has a gig, and we're playing these songs. And there's no sort of deception that we're trying to be like naturalistic, like make you go on this ride as if these are, I mean, that's ridiculous. I always like this quote from Chinese theater that the emperor is played by a small boy, so as not to have any deception,
Does it draw from when you see other more mainstream narrative theater? It feels like everyone's just faking it?
Yeah, I just can't. It's very hard for me to get on that bandwagon. Whereas Paul, he loves that sort of journey he loves naturalistic theater. He's an actor, and he's a really good naturalistic actor, so he's into that technique. So to me, it's like when I watch a ballet dancer and I see that they have this technique, I go for the technique ride. He goes for the technique ride of straight acting, whereas in our world of big dance, we don't go on that ride. That's not our technique. So, like for instance, our performer that's playing Heracles is a drummer, and
an actor,
and an actor,
sort of,
right,
I mean,
and a really good naturalistic actor too. But I like the idea. I had this idea. Oh, Heracles could be a drummer because he makes a lot of noise. He's like, he's the kind of guest that would be too noisy in your house.
Right.
So that was just like a no-brainer. I mean, Pete has to play the drums. And so his whole character revolved around drumming. And so if somebody else had played that, the whole play would be different. Our play would be different, and Heracles would be portrayed differently. But also, the last scene of the play, which is the real, what do they call, and Pauly would be better, talking about the agon, which is what I love about Greek theater, is that those arguments that go A, B, A, B, A, B, and both sides are brilliant, and you can't really take a side because they're both so strong. That's the pinnacle of this play, and that we just let them act that out. But not just let them act that out, because what I did was, when I staged that last scene, I wanted to refute an idea that's been going around in the dance world a lot that I just hate, which is that this whole new thing. So when you sit on panels, you hear it all the time, like, but is this new?
Right.
So, and is this new for this artist, and what are they doing now, and all this kind of stuff? Well, that's just not realistic. That's not how people work. It's not how any of us think. It's not how we live. To me, all our pieces are one big piece that are just like, we're just working endlessly, and they just sort of come to fruition, and then we're already working on our next piece, and it's whatever the sort of raggy, taggy things from this piece have been rolled into that piece, and that piece is so weird, back to the land, 1970s, completely different, but it still has some, I hope, vestiges of things in this piece that I'm still interested in, and I will work with those things, those movements, those ideas, until they don't interest me anymore. So what I did was, for the last scene, I took the staging, the exact staging of my last piece, last scene, and I superimposed it on this scene, this last scene. So it's not new, it's exactly old. And then we did it, and it was really weird, because it's completely wrong. First they...
You said it was from the
Come
the last?
Toujours.
Sure,
Yeah,
right.
the last scene of Come Toujours, the staging of that.
Sure.
They learned it, and that these two actors learned it, and then so it's like choreography.
Was that an effort to consciously create a through line from work to work?
No, it was me being sort of stubborn and mad at the idea of you have to always be new.
Right.
So, but it's also me finding ways to create
subvert that.
Ideas,
Right.
So we learned that staging, like 4 steps this way and 2 that way, and lift your arm and look that way, and then we superimposed the text of this play onto that staging. And that was really interesting and really like strange and abstract, because they're like doing everything at the wrong time. And so that was really fun. And then we worked from there. We didn't keep it exactly, but we worked, it was a beginning point. So I mean, a lot of the stuff in the piece comes from things that have nothing to do with the piece. Comes from your life.
Right.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the nature of acting and the kind of performers you have, that you draw from their real lives, who they are in the real world, it seems, I've always thought in watching your performers that it requires a very unique individual for them to be able to hit all the marks that you want people to do. What do you look for? I mean, obviously people need to move and perform, and deal with text if needed, and each of your performers tend to have their own distinct personalities visually and everything else. Is it difficult to find new performers for your work?
Well, they have to be beautiful to me. Like, I really look for a certain beauty on stage. I don't know if that is anybody else's idea of beauty, but I'm very attracted to my performers. So, and I think that's pretty universal, that I think we on the outside are more interested in the people on stage than the people on stage are interested in the director or choreographer. I think that the love affair is more that way, because they're enacting your ideas, and your movements and your melodies in your head. And so those people I have to be fascinated with. So that's a very small group. And then they also have to be able to be on stage in a way that I can see who they are, but they can also wear somebody else at the same time. So, and that's a little bit hard to talk about. Which
is different than what you were talking about, acting a role.
Yeah, right. It's different than acting a role. Most of them couldn't act their way out of a paper bag, probably. I don't know. I don't want them to take acting class. I don't want them to be able to do that. And I know some of them sometimes are like, oh, maybe I should take acting class. And I'm like, please don't,
Are you afraid that it will steal from their inner natural?
Yeah, because there's a certain thing that they're doing that is something that we've been working on for years and years and years. I don't know what it is, but I do know, like when we did Mac Wellman's Antigone, which was the first Greek play we had done, and we hired an actress to play Antigone. She was a friend of Paul's. She's an actress, just straight old actress, wonderful, excellent at what she does. And she suffered with us for months over this text, suffered valiantly, never complaining, and just had no idea what we were doing, and just terrible. I felt so sorry for her. And finally she said to Molly, who's one of our performers, she said, Molly, you know, when I'm in a play or a movie, I'm pretending to be the mom, or I'm pretending to be, you know, the aunt, or I'm pretending to be the secretary, whatever. But I don't know what I'm pretending to be in this. What are you pretending? What are you guys pretending? And Molly's like, we're not pretending anything. You know, which I think is like the epitome of what this small little theater dance company or dance theater company is about, is we're really not pretending anything. You know, Pete is Pete, and Molly is Molly, and Timberly is Timberly, and they're just themselves, but then they get really into doing this other thing at the same time. And sometimes I think it's a little like the Bill Murray school of acting, where I feel like I look at him and he's like saying I love you in a movie, but he's also Bill Murray saying, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So there's those, maybe something like that.
And what you do, it's very different than method acting, for instance.
Totally different.
Where people are trying to live the emotions of, but that's still kind of put on in a certain way.
Yeah, so that's why doing an emotional piece was so interesting and not a problem. Not a problem for these guys at all.
When you said you really hope they won't take acting classes, do you feel the same about taking dance classes?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, nobody takes dance classes anymore. They all do yoga. So
in your company, or
no, everywhere? Yeah, my company, and they all, you know. So there are actually 2 people in our group that take dance, but we have 2 dancers. We hired 2 dancers for this piece because I wanted it to have a certain sort of level of movement in it, and these guys are also really strong other performer types, and I think dance class is really great.
And then the use of voice and song, I mean, that has such ancient traditions and is connected to Greek dramatic tradition. But it's handled so beautifully in your. Did you have to work heavily with your performers around?
We worked really hard, and we also chose people that could sing and could keep harmonies, and the harmonies are really complex.
Are they drawn from shape? No.
They were drawn from, well, there's a couple sources. We did some work with Huckading.
Oh, that's right.
Some of that is gone, but some of it's still there. There's certainly a sense of some of the harmonies are like, I can see why you say shape note singing, because they're like that kind of hollering.
Right.
Like the kind of church that would be out in the backyard and singing kind of that kind of sound. Yeah.
And it kind of makes your spine tingle a little bit, but you're not sure why, because of something about the harmonic nature of the
And there also, there's some singing that's just like really contemporary. Like I was using Antony and the Johnsons as an image for one of the songs.
I think when I saw the last run through, it was still on tape, perhaps, or something.
Oh, really?
Maybe, or maybe it just sounded. I heard that, or
it could be. It could have been.
Yeah.
And then we cut one of the songs, since you saw it, that was going to be more like, I had this image of a very late Elvis Presley, where I have this tape of him sort of leaving the stage, and he's really high, and he's trying to sing, and we had something like that, but we actually let go of that when we were in France. But not the movement. The movement's still there.
Is it hard to let go of things you love when you're making a piece? Because it seems like your process, and yours and Paul's both, that you're making, and that you're having to shed, and you're shaping as you make constantly. And so I would guess you'd have to let go of some things that you like on their own, but just don't work with the piece.
Yeah, I guess you know you can always use them. They're yours.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And the whole becomes so much more important than the parts. And so the question is, what's going to happen when you let something go? Because it might be like cutting a hole in a skirt. You know, you don't really know what's going to. It might all fall apart. You know, but not like holding on to. Probably, I'm not so good at getting rid of stuff that I loved.
I have just a question back on Anne's translation. You know, there's a like sort of a debate in academic circles around her wonderful strip back and almost use of of everyday language that we would use, and not the sort of overly kind of dramatic, very flowery language that earlier translations may have used. And people seem to be on both sides about that. But in the use of it in a dramatic context, it seems like it might kind of mirror Big Dance Theater's approach to, say, Greek drama, in that you're kind of reducing to core essentials and conveying that to a contemporary audience in a way that makes sense to them in a certain kind of way. Did you see, did you look at some of those earlier translations and then see like, oh wow, wouldn't this have been weird to try to use this language versus Anne's language?
Well, some of them are really nice.
Yeah.
And one of them in particular is really nice. Anne's is so immediate, and it's so skeletal. And again, like, I don't know, like when I was little, I saw a lot of story ballets. I can think of things like Fall River Legend or the Moors Pavane or things like that.
Right.
And where the characters are so scaled back, like everything is so skeletal. As Martha Graham said, there's no mother-in-law in dance. You know, it's just, you can't have one. Nobody would know who she is, you know what I mean? So everything is so pared down, and that's totally my perspective. And I feel, and that's really what we got rid of in those 6,000 words, was all the extra characters and any speech that goes into anything that turns down a road this way or turns that way or whatever. But she has her scholarship being the beginning of it, her awesome scholarship, and her poetic treatment of the material and her contemporization of the way she hears it is so rigorous and beautifully sculpted. In Orestes, she had this line, it was like saying to Menelaus, "Hey, you with the big blonde hair." So I was like, gee, I wonder if they really said that, or like, what's the deal? Like, they didn't have those big blonde ladies, did they? And like, what's the, you know, so I thought, oh no, she's just being funny, you know, I don't know. So I asked, this man came who was a Greek scholar, and I said, so if you were to translate the line, the big blonde hair, you know, what? He says, no, Menelaus was known as being a very vain blonde. And so she actually is correct.
Right.
You know, it's correct. It gives contemporary audiences exactly probably the feel that the Greeks had about the way he looked. And that's just been our experience over and over again, that she doesn't take liberties. It's not that she's taking liberties, it's that she really is making it really real for herself. That's what she's hearing. And she'll often talk about things like, well, did the Greeks laugh here? I think the Greeks laughed here, and I have to make the audience laugh in the same places. You know, I have to that's what, I'm doing service to this play by making it right for our audience. So she has to understand it from like a 2,000-year-old perspective, but her scholarship is so deep. Who else would you trust, you know, really, to do that? And then her poetry is, you know, so sublime, so.
You know, the comic side of this play, it's one of the reviews that came out of The Pillow talked about in the headline, like, you know, big fun. And I did sort of, you know, because there is a preconception that all Greek drama is tragic and really somber and sad. And was that, I mean, I wouldn't, even all that we've talked about it in the run-through I saw and things like that, I wouldn't have used the word, you know, I mean, fun, it has fun aspects to it, but how do you feel about it being described as? Yeah, it seems, it's sort of like reductive or something, but it is, you did mind some of the comedy and irony in the work.
Yeah, I mean, I think
effectively.
Everything is comic, you know, I mean, tragedy is comic. I mean, if you've ever experienced a tragedy, there's something comic always happens. It's just untrue to not deal with the comedy in this play or in anything, in any piece. But I don't think it's like jokey. There's nothing jokey about Euripides. There was another article written recently, like I think last week, that talked about the entertainment value of the piece, that it's so entertaining. And, you know, it's just those words are so tinged with like other stuff that
commercial theater.
I don't hear it that way. I don't hear it that way at all. I hope that it's you know, I wouldn't mind that you're amused by stuff, but also that you're tickled in a certain way, like two strange things coming together make you laugh, or something, more like that, or
Right.
even like the tone. Like I hear a laugh even in France on this one part where we make a huge tonal shift, and everybody laughs, or and I think they're laughing at that. I don't think it's funny.
Almost?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like two things like sort of
Yeah.
hitting up against each other, or they see this piece of text projected, and they laugh, and the actor's always like, "Why are they laughing?" And that's not funny, but it's not funny. It's not entertaining, but it's some realization. I don't know what that is. It's humor.
Right. You know, this has been great and such a pleasure to have this conversation. I think I'm going to wrap up with one last question, which is, in the field of live arts, there's always debate about the state of theater and its usefulness or its the sort of anachronistic quality in the digital age. And what is it about the still gathering of people together in a single place to experience in real time something that's live happening on stage that still drives you and Paul in the making of the work? Why does that? Do you see that as something that will continue to be important? Obviously, we're here looking at a play that's over 2,000 years old. So obviously, these questions have probably been raised at times throughout that 2,000 years.
And they should be, yeah.
Right now, it seems to be, there's a certain pointedness to it because of the speed of the culture, the amount of digital material that people are interfacing with and are entertained or attracted to. How would you sort of articulate the reason that theater, that for you, still needs to exist?
Oh, well, I mean, in this particular piece, I feel like it needed to be in a theater, and you'll see that we use a lot of curtains and a lot of imagery that has to do with theater because it's from the earliest theater there is. In our new piece, I'm using the earliest recorded sound that there ever was, there's this French, mid-19th century sound. I'm using that because it's about the beginnings of language. And I think, like, I guess I would ask you the same question. When you have the audience come in to a performance that you're excited about and you see them all arriving and taking off their coats and, the lights coming down, and there's that sense, I wish there was a curtain that whooshed up because that's like my favorite moment in the theater. It's like so wonderful. It's like this unmasking.
You could have had that if you wanted.
Really?
Oh, no, actually, it's a curtain that opens.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But you didn't design the work that way.
No, we didn't, because nobody has that.
Oh, yeah.
But like when you're at the Met or something and you
Right.
see, or we've performed at City Center and the curtain opens, it almost knocks the dancers off their feet. It's the whoosh of the wind.
Right, yeah.
This is like a huge dramatic moment. And I feel like everything's so minimized and so casual and so easy to make, I'll just make a video on YouTube or whatever. Hey, guess what? This is not democratic. There's a lot of finesse and virtuosity that goes into crafting the material that you bring to your theater. So, like, to me, the more framed and formal, and, I know in France you see it a lot, where the audience comes in and they wave to each other across, because they know each other, because that's the community that comes together. And they're not artists. They're neighbors.
Right.
And that feeling that we're still coming around the campfire to sing these songs together or to, act out these stories that might still mean something to us, that, to me, has a lot of life and meaning, which isn't to say that things shouldn't be staged outside of the proscenium. Absolutely. I mean, our next piece isn't staged on a proscenium. So, it has to do with the piece itself and the way where your mind is. I mean, a museum piece could be going into a sailing tank, like, right. Whatever. Yeah. All possibilities are open as long as the artist can manage it and knows how to sculpt that environment.
And there's still that live interface between performance and audience. And so
the live part is like, to me, the excitement of being in a town square, which we don't have in New York, but when you go to other cities, like in Mexico or in Europe, you see these town squares where people are coming together. I like that. So I will cling to the live part, although that doesn't mean I don't want to make a film.
I was wondering that, because it seems like your work has a cinematic quality and such a strong visual sensibility that I would think you and Paul both be people are trying to seduce you into filmmaking and things.
And it doesn't mean that I wouldn't want to do that. It's just that I still love all the interplay between real life and accident, and that thing that Mac Wellman calls the third thing, that moment, how the audience feels about the piece and how that affects the piece, and that third thing that only happens on that night, the spontaneity, the uniqueness, completely fascinates me still. It doesn't mean forever, but it certainly still does. I think that one of the questions that I have is why people do theater in the face of contemporary political issues, war and poverty and things like that. That's to me more what brings tension into my body.
Right.
And I recently saw this French drawing show, and there was a quote by Daumier, and he said, "If I can't fight for my country, I'll paint for her." Huh. And it was just that, like, to me, that's a really interesting.
That's the tension, is like with so many issues and problems and political challenges that this country faces, how one can devote the time to making something for a stage. One could, of course, create that work with a political perspective.
Which I'm not interested in at all.
Yeah.
And right. I have seen so little successful work in that way, and I don't really think that road, it might be sort of an offshoot of it, but I've yet to see the piece that made me inspired to do that kind of work.
Yeah.
Even the great political, like Kurt Yost said, you can't fight war with a ballet.
Sure, right.
But you can paint for her,
Yeah, right.
So.
Well, maybe that's a good way to end. You created for us in a world that has all kinds of endless, disturbing challenges, but that you've guys have made something very beautiful and moving on a very human level, and complex and confounding. And so we really look forward to opening night in 2 nights.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Annie.